Hi, I'm Quinn from Autistamatic, and this is 30 Days of Autism Awareness. We're about halfway through this 30-day video project, and there's been a variety of reactions on social media and via messages. The majority has been very positive and encouraging, but a few comments have been less so. I'm not alone amongst autistic advocates in having had comments suggesting that I think I speak for all autistics when I put out content. On my YouTube channel there's a disclaimer at the beginning of each video to make it clear that's not the case, but in the 2-minute format of social media videos it's not a practical thing to do. I've known I was autistic for over 30 years, and I've had all that time to meet others like myself and learn about autistic lives. I've lived an autistic life for nearly 50 years and spent a lifetime learning about how those differences shape mine and other lives. When I talk about my experiences, I don't for one moment want anyone to think that I believe the lives of other autists are identical to mine. I speak from a combination of my own experience, what I've learned from years of personal research, and my interactions with other autistic people. When I say that I understand the world in a particular way, it's purely personal. When I say that many other autists think in a similar way, it's because I've read their experiences or conversed with them one-to-one and recognised common ground. You shouldn't expect every autistic person to think like I or we do. I'm providing a window into my own autistic world. If there's one thing I hope to convey, it's that autistic life, communication and thinking is not necessarily what you might think if all you know about it comes from doctors, scientists or autism charities. There are many misconceptions about autistic people, some of them very damaging to us. If you want to learn how autistic people live, think and function in the world, then only autistic people can tell you. We can live as rich and varied a life as anyone who is not autistic. We may be different, but we are far more than any medical, scientific or diagnostic perspective could ever tell you. Have you ever had a day when you just can't face anyone? If you're autistic, you definitely will have. Not just once, not occasionally, but regularly. Being an autistic adult in a neurotypical world places pressures and obligations on us that most people simply can't recognise. I've tried many times to explain the paralysing fear that can grip me sometimes when I'm expected to perform some social function most people would find routine. I go to work 5 days a week, and by the end of the day my social energy is often drained to zero. I've nothing left to do anything else. There's a concept from the chronic illness community called spoon theory. A person only has so many spoons of energy to complete tasks before they run out. They have to prioritise tasks to make the best use of those spoons. If they use a spoon of energy to do something pleasant, they may not have a spoon spare to do something mundane but vital, such as dress themselves or go to the shop for vital supplies. It's a balancing act. The concept has been adopted and adapted by the autistic community, but the spoons are those of social and sensory energy. If we use up our spoons just getting through the social routine and sensory onslaught of a day at work or school, we may have none left to mix with friends, to engage in social media, or even make idle conversation with our families or loved ones. I've been unable to attend events that I've bought tickets for. Not cheap ones either. I've planned for it, made all the arrangements, but on the day, I haven't the spoons left to cope with crowds or even talking with friends. Sometimes I don't even have enough to get in touch with them and tell them I won't be there. I'm so empty I can't even drum up enough to explain. I just don't show up. There's an empty chair where I would have sat. I've lost friends over it before. I made a habit of not telling most people of my autism until relatively recently. Maybe if I had, some of those friends would have understood and made allowances for me. But I'll never know now. Not going out isn't a choice for autistic people. Sometimes it's a question of survival. I love comedy. Humour is one of the cornerstones of my life, yet many neurotypical people think of me as being deadly serious and lacking any sense of humour. Some even think it's because I'm autistic. I don't necessarily find the same things funny as they do though. A great deal of humour involves cruelty. The British stand-up comics of the 1970s were prime examples of this. On TV shows like The Comedians or The Wheel Tappers and Shunters Social Club, jokes at other people's expense were a stock in trade. Cracks about people of colour, women, gay people and disabled people were bandied about freely and lapped up by tens of millions of eager viewers. Modern day sensibilities have moved on from such destructive entertainment, but it still lives on in less overt forms. The perceived inferiority of other people still raises a laugh. There is almost always a but to any joke. It might be the kid whose clothes aren't as fashionable or tidy, the workmate who doesn't socialise, the guy with the bald head, the woman who battles with her weight, or the person who seems a bit slower to understand. Whilst less people joke about entire groups, much of what passes as humour is at somebody else's expense. When humour is at the cost of another, there is cruelty involved. When the person being laughed about realises they are being mocked, often the comedian will become embarrassed at being caught out. They may even become aggressive and turn their attempt at humour into direct attack onto their target's vulnerability. I seem to be able to have a good laugh with other autistic people though. Many's the time I've been with other autists or like-minded neurotypical people, and we've rolled about in laughter while others look on puzzled. We find humour in wordplay, puns, spoonerisms or ridiculous concepts. There's humour in contradiction and coincidence, joy in finding common ground. Little matches the guffaws of laughter as a group of autistics come to the same conclusion at the same time. Just like other misconceptions about autistic communication and culture, we don't lack a sense of humour. We just may not laugh at some of the things that tickle the funny bones of other people. I've lost count of the times I've been called negative in my life, even when I've not made one negative comment. It's happened at school, in the family, many times in the workplace. In fact, just about anywhere I communicate, there are people ready to criticise me for negativity when I've done nothing more than ask questions. I can't take things for granted. I can't just assume that because X applies in one situation, it will apply to another. I don't understand how people can lead their lives that way. I have to treat every circumstance as unique and judge my actions accordingly. My autistic world is one of cause and effect. I see everything I do or take part in as a series of interconnected events. A machine of sorts. Every action, every word is a cog or a lever in the works. I need to visualise all these parts of the mechanism in place before I can assume something will work. If I make assumptions, then it's a missing part and the machine may fail. This is why I ask questions. If parts are left out or contingencies haven't been accounted for, then a plan may be doomed to failure. I have to be meticulous and that infuriates people. In general, the neurotypical way is to make many assumptions and to regard many things as not needing to be said. They think events will unfold in a particular way because they've done so before. It's a shortcut to getting results, but if details are missed, then disasters can happen. Unfortunately, most neurotypical people don't have the patience to answer my questions. They get annoyed because they're happy with the gaps in their picture and they don't respect that those gaps can make a huge difference to someone like me. They label my need for certainty as negativity or skepticism. If you ask someone how to put out a fire, they will most likely tell you to throw water over it. But if that fire is in oil or it's an electrical fire, throwing water over it may make the situation worse. I have to ask the question, what type of fire is it, before I can answer? Am I being negative when I ask that? Or am I just making sure I understand the situation fully before I accept your plan? Autistics don't like change. You'll hear that from people with just a basic understanding of autism, right up to professors in the field. It's so ubiquitous. I get people telling me I won't like something because it's a change from what I'm used to. Change comes in different flavours. There's beneficial change that can be easily understood and needs no explanation. There is change that might not have clear benefits but can be explained. There's also change that has no benefit, and change which does harm. I don't have a problem with the first two. Few of the autists I know do either. Take the current situation around the world. We're all being asked to make huge changes to our lives and routines because of coronavirus. But the majority of the people I see rejecting the advice or complaining about those changes are not autistic. In fact, I'm seeing a great deal of other autists who just can't understand why people are pushing back against what are clearly logical steps to protect people. Not all change is so easy to understand though. Often changes are put in place just to give the impression of progress. Ineffective managers and politicians do it all the time. They pass off pointless change as improvement. Because it takes time for changes to prove their worth, it gives them a temporary shield against criticism. It is in the autistic nature to question change, though. If change happens for no good reason or even has the potential to be harmful, those questions cannot be answered. Do those in charge attempt to explain, or do they label the inquisitive autist as inflexible and resistant to progress? Some autistic people have great difficulty communicating with the neurotypical world, so their need to understand changes is not so easy to fulfill. Would it be so different for anyone else who doesn't understand the way people around them communicate, though? Wouldn't anyone, autistic or not, be fearful or resistant to changes if they didn't understand the language in which it was explained to them? Is it right that autists are resistant to change? Or is it that we don't feel comfortable with change unless we understand why it's worthwhile? If there really is no benefit, or if the explanation makes no sense, is it really unreasonable of us to prefer things as they are? Even people with just a passing knowledge of autism have heard of special interests. The picture is one of an overriding interest about which we are overwhelmingly passionate, which takes over much of our lives. People think we're single-minded collectors and walking encyclopedias of information on a narrow topic. For a long time, I thought I was a bit odd amongst autists because my experience doesn't fit that mould. I get intensely interested in things, but there's not been a single lifelong passion that's dominated my world. My interests may last for months or years, but they get replaced periodically as life, technology and society move on. It turns out that I'm not the odd one out after all. Almost every autist I've met has a similar experience. Their special interests change over time too, and like me, they retain the knowledge or skills learned and utilise them in a later interest or reignite that original passion at a later date. When I was a child, one of my special interests was the TV show Doctor Who. For a while I owned every single Doctor Who novelisation ever published, bought with hard-earned pocket money in countless dusty second-hand bookshops. As soon as Doctor Who Weekly magazine came out, I subscribed. I drew Daleks on everything, learned everything I could about the actors, the locations and the production process. I did much the same with Star Trek and then with Babylon 5 in my 20s. I went through periods of obsessively reading the back catalogues of particular authors. I had a passion for computers from long before the home computer boom, which years later was reignited when I became interested in making electronic music and again when the internet began to reshape our lives. Whenever I pick up a new interest, I have to dive deep into it, absorbing everything to hand and losing myself in its details. Nothing is ever a passing interest to me. I'm deeply absorbed into it. If there is one thing I enjoy about conversation with other autists, it's hearing about their special interests. There may not be something that tempts me to dive down the rabbit hole, but sharing in their passion and enthusiasm provides no end of pride in the value and potential of autistic people. There's been a number of surprising reports from autistic academics working with government or in fields such as sociology and psychology. They concern the attitudes of their colleagues who have produced reports or published papers containing out-of-date, misguided or harmful misinformation about autistic people and our lives. The conversation seems to go something like this. Do you really think you should be publishing this? What if somebody who's autistic reads it?
Oh, don't be silly. They'll never read this. They don't know what we say about them.
Knowing as many autistic people as I do, that response is utterly ridiculous. I doubt there is another social group which is more engaged with the scientific and academic discourse about themselves than the autistic community. Most autistic people have known they were different all their lives. People who are diagnosed as adults often only set out to seek diagnosis after months, even years of research into why they relate to the world differently. They read publish papers whenever they can get access. They digest lengthy books, spend their spare time poring over the internet searching for information, and often join online communities to learn from people who are diagnosed already. The names of prominent academics and commentators in the field, past and present, are as familiar as those of A-list movie stars. They are household names in autistic communities, where knowledge of their work is commonplace and provokes a variety of strong opinions. There are publications reporting on the cutting edge of autism research, whose articles are shared between tens of thousands of autistic people, their conclusions and observations receiving analysis and critique beyond anything you might expect from any other professional publication. It's quite possible that they may be more widely read by autists than by the specialists they target. As a community that is actively pushed to the margins of society, the hunger to understand why that happens cannot be overstated. There are thousands of autistic bloggers, podcasters, filmmakers, artists, cartoonists and more, discussing and sharing everything we know about our lives and how to survive in a hostile world. Consuming that content are millions of informed people, all learning about what the scientists and academics say about us. It's a special interest. If you still think that autistic people don't know what's being said about us, think again.